Every few years, Doctor Who goes through some big changes when an actor decides that they want to leave the role and then someone else takes over. Let's talk about regeneration. Regeneration is something that has been in the programme ever since 1966. It is one of the catalysts as to why Doctor Who has stood the test of time and why it has been for quite some time the longest running science fiction programme in the world. Here is a tier list. I'm going to rank all of the Doctor's regenerations that we have seen in the programme ever since the first one, up to the most recent one as of time of recording, which is the power of the Doctor, when Jodie Whittaker changed back to David Tennant. So there's no better place to start this tier list by taking a look back at the very first regeneration, which is the first Doctor into the second Doctor. Who would have thought it, eh? First into second. It wasn't going to be first into third now, was it? William Hartnell into Patrick Troughton is a biggie, of course, because this was the first ever time. No one knew how this was going to go down. The BBC were taking a huge risk. It was a very bold move to change the actor because of behind the scenes things that were going on at the time. William Hartnell was the stalwart of Doctor Who, and it was a big risk to have the programme carry on without him with a new actor. But my God, I think without this regeneration, we would not have had all the subsequent regenerations. And as I said, I don't think Doctor Who would have lasted for as long as it has. In my eyes, this is a very important moment in not only Doctor Who history, but in TV history as well. The first Doctor's regeneration, I think the effect overall is very good. The whole morph from him into the second and the whole glowing effect that was used, I think it stands up very well even for today. And I know this was made in 1966. This happened at the end of the 10th Planet, which also was the Cybermen's very first appearance. Just a little side note there. The effect of why the first Doctor regenerated, it's all up for debate. Some people said, it's the first Doctor getting old. He's just wearing a bit thin. He even says that towards the end. And some people have said that it could be due to the effects of a Dalek time destructor, which obviously took place a few stories before in the Daleks' master plan. It's all up for debate why the first Doctor decided to drop down on that TARDIS floor and then change into a much younger man. But for what it's worth, I really like this regeneration. I know it's the first one, but as I said, this was the watermark, as it is, for what a regeneration should be, and it's inspired all of the other regenerations that we have seen since. Well, I say all of them. Some of them are different to others, but we'll talk about one of those in just a second. I am going to rank this one as an A. I'm going to put this in A tier because I like it and I think it does the job. It's a very effective transition from the first to second Doctor. Moving on to the second Doctor's regeneration now. And it's up for debate, really, of whether this is a regeneration or not, because we never actually see him change into the third Doctor. I know that fans have tried to fill in the gaps by making fan films like Devious in the 1990s, getting John Pertwee back to fill in that. Because in the programme, obviously, the first time we see John Pertwee just falls out of the TARDIS. We never actually see Troughton morph into Pertwee, and then it's led to the whole season 6B thing, and even this is sort of being alluded to in the programme. I say sort of because the second Doctor's appeared in the 3 Doctors and the 5 Doctors and the 2 Doctors, and he talks about Time Lords, and he's with Jamie, and Jamie knows about the Time Lords and the 2 Doctors, but he doesn't in the War Games. So it's all up for debate, and even Big Finisher now supposedly filling this gap in with the Second Doctor Adventures range, with Michael Troughton voicing his late father's role. But anyway, moving on to the actual supposed regeneration, I'm just going to rank this based on what we saw at the end of the War Games. I think the whole context behind it was very effective. The Time Lords forcing the Doctor to regenerate, it's something that's never really been done much with since, until the Power of the Doctor, like the whole idea of a forced regeneration with the Master and all of that carry on. And here, I think it's quite terrifying, like what happens to the Second Doctor. He is put through so much turmoil. He has to say goodbye to his companions. Their memories of him are gone, supposedly forever. But as I said, it's up for debate with Jamie and the two Doctors, and yeah. And then the Second Doctor just suffers at the end. He's spinning in this like abyss. I don't know where he is. He's spinning. It's like this is Time Lord's capital punishment. It is absolutely terrifying, and I think it is one of the most terrifying ordeals that any Doctor has had to go through for a regeneration. So I suppose the whole season 6B thing might be a sense of comfort for some people, because the Time Lords decided we're going to make the Doctor go on a few missions before he eventually has to regenerate. I don't know. But for what it's worth, what we see at the end of the War Games, I quite like the whole uniqueness about it. Yeah, we don't see a morph effect, but I just like it for that. I like how we have those different effects, which remind me a little bit of Bohemian Rhapsody, with those multiple images of the Second Doctor on the screen all at once. I'm going to put this in B tier because I still do prefer the First Doctor's regeneration into the second, because it's more definitive. You know what you're getting here. This is the end of the First Doctor's life. It's beginning of the second. With the second, it's left a little bit more ambiguous, and at the time, I think that was the whole idea at the end of the War Games. A lot of people weren't so sure whether Doctor Who would continue into the 1970s, but as we all know, the rest is history. It did. And yeah, I'm going to put this in B tier. So now moving on to a more conventional regeneration, it's the third to the fourth. And I think John Pertwee's regeneration is very touching. I think his final scene feels so real, and he actually dies. Like, he dies and his eyes are still open. It's quite haunting. It's quite sad to see this Doctor go after so many thrilling adventures. But if I was to talk about the effect of the regeneration, compared to the first one, it's a bit of a letdown, because all it is literally just a fade from Pertwee's face to Tom Baker's face, and that is it. That's all you're getting. The whole context behind the regeneration is all right. The Third Doctor has suffered intense radiation poisoning due to exposure to the Metabilis crystals, and he had to face his fear with a giant spider. Some people say it might be a bit of a letdown that he didn't get to face the Master, but due to behind-the-scenes stuff and Roger Delgado's untimely death, unfortunately, this could not happen. And what we got is what we got. But I've always liked the whole context behind the Third Doctor's regeneration. As I said, I always found it very sad. What makes this work even more is the inclusion of Sarah Jane Smith and the Brigadier. So we have familiar onlookers at the scene, and what lets us down is the effect. And I've seen some fans do better jobs with YouTube edits online, and I suppose in a future Blu-ray set for season 11 they might do something with the morphing of the Doctor's faces from the third to the fourth, that would be very nice. But in the original context, from original broadcast, from Planet of the Spiders to Robot, yeah, I gotta be honest, the whole fade thing is a little bit cheap, especially when we saw something a bit more grand in 1966 with the 10th Planet, with the first Doctor into the second Doctor. This was 1974. This was like nearly 10 years later. So there was no excuse. They could have done a bit better there, couldn't they? For that, I'm going to put this in B because simply I feel like the first into the second was better. You know what? I'm going to put this below the War Games because I just like the War Games regeneration effect more as well. That is more inventive, it's more unique. This just feels lazy with the whole fading. Right, let's talk about the fourth Doctor's regeneration in Logopolis into the fifth. Now, I've got to be honest, I liked this much more a few years ago, but now having watched a fourth Doctor marathon in the last couple of years, bearing in mind that Tom Baker did 7 seasons, so there's so many stories that he did, so many storylines, and then we get this grand finale. He fights the Master, he tries to save the universe, he falls off from the Pharos project, and then that's it. He regenerates. We get the whole thing with the Watcher coming in between, and then we get the whole fade in with Peter Davison. I think in context of 7 years as the Doctor, some may say it's anticlimactic, but at the same time, this death is heroic. He's just saved the universe, but at a cost. He's fallen down like hundreds of feet, and then that's it. I think the final line is very touching, much like how the third Doctor's final line is also very touching. And I think overall the effect is good. It's much better than what was used in Planet of the Spiders, and it's also quite unique, the whole idea of the Watcher being like an in-between incarnation of the Doctor. It's like Doctor 4.5. And yeah, I think this is quite iconic for what it is. I'm going to put this in A tier. Have perhaps had a more epic regeneration, but at the same time though, I'm still putting this in A tier. I think this is pretty good. The whole idea of having flashbacks of the Doctor's villains before his eyes, just before he falls down, and then as he's dying, he sees apparitions of all his past companions in that incarnation. And I suppose that's the closest that you ever get to like a whole summary of his era, those 7 years. So I'm going to put this in A tier, but it's still not as good as the first into the second. Just my opinion, though. Now let's talk about the fifth Doctor's regeneration into the sixth in the Caves of Androzani. And holy shit, I absolutely adore this regeneration. Straight away, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you right now where I'm going to put this. I'm going to put this in S tier. This is a great regeneration scene, and it's preceded by an absolutely stellar story as well. Many people regard the Caves of Androzani as one of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time, and for good reason. The fifth Doctor is heroic again, and I think he's more so than the fourth because he sacrifices himself for someone he hardly knows. And I know that Big Finish have done more audios with the Fifth Doctor and Perry, but if we're just talking about the TV show on its own, this is always Perry's second story. The Fifth Doctor could have just decided, no, I'm just going to take all the medicine I need, and then that's it. What ends up happening is the Fifth Doctor succumbs to Spectrox, and then he dies, and he doesn't even know if he's going to survive this one. He doesn't know if he's going to regenerate. Of course, he did. We have that fantastic effect. Again, apparitions of past companions coming up. Although why Chameleon comes up is anyone's guess because Chameleon was shit. And then we have that lovely, lovely image of Anthony Ainley's master, which sort of eggs the Doctor on to survive and then regenerate into the Sixth Doctor. And then the Sixth Doctor even has first lines at the end of the story, which was the first time this ever happened. And this has become a trait of the new series. Every time a Doctor regenerates, the new one says a few lines and then cliffhanger, end of story. Yeah, really good. After all these years later, the Caves of Androzani and the regeneration, it's just really good. So yeah, easy S tier regeneration. But now we go on to the 6th to the 7th regeneration. Now I know the 6th Doctor had a definitive final story in the form of the last adventure. Again from Big Finish. What is it with Big Finish filling in all these gaps? It's quite a theme here, isn't it? But when we're talking about the TV show on its own, this regeneration is shit. It's shit. It's D tier because, as we all know, it's not Colin Baker. It's just Sylvester McCoy pretending to be Colin Baker because Colin Baker did not want to come back. He did not agree to do a regeneration scene. So what they did was just put Sylvester McCoy in a blonde wig and then that's it. He changes. And I think the effect, it's pretty shit, especially when you compare it to the grand effect of the Caves of Androzani and even Logopolis. I mean, to the credit, there's a bit more effort with the effect than what we see at the end of Planet of the Spiders. But the whole thing, like the whole context of the regeneration, the Sixth Doctor falls on the floor. He's there on the floor. That's it. It just feels so lazy. It's such a lazy way for the Sixth Doctor to regenerate into the Seventh. So I'm so glad that we had more additional context to this regeneration added at the end of the last adventure. So, yeah, it's really shit though when you just have a look at it visually on its own at the beginning of Time of the Rani. It's shit. So for me, it's the shittest regeneration that's going to feature on this list today. So it's D tier. And yeah, I just want to move on because I'm not really a fan of that story anyway. Right. TV movie time now. We're going to talk about the 7th into the 8th. The way the 7th Doctor dies, I've always found stupid. The fact that he just gets killed by a gang. This is supposed to be one of the darkest Doctors, and he just walks out and then just gets shot. It just feels so lazy. So I'm going to say that right off the bat. I don't particularly like the 7th Doctor's death. It's quite haunting, his final lines, though. Like the fact that he's trying to tell the surgeons stop the master, but they just think he's just some hobo and is just talking gibberish. The effect that's used, though, is brilliant. I really like the effect from the 7th to the 8th Doctor, and I think that is what makes this regeneration a good regeneration, just ignoring the stupid way that the reason why it happened in the first place. So because of that, the whole electricity as the Doctor's face sort of gets disfigured and then eventually morphs into Paul McGann. Really good. So I think for that alone, I'll put this in B because I think the effect saves it. I was tempted to put it in C, but no, I'll put it in B. I'll put it in B because the whole effect of it is unique, and then we'll get the nice callbacks to Frankenstein, the parallels as it's happening, and then the whole thing, he's alive. Yeah, quite good stuff. On to the Eighth Doctor's regeneration now. I'm going to put this in. Actually, thinking about it, do I put it in A or do I put it in B? I'll put it in A because I like the way the Eighth Doctor dies in this. Sounds morbid, that doesn't it? Saying it out loud. I like the whole context of how he changes. He has to take an elixir of life. He chooses his regeneration. He chooses to be a warrior. And that final line by the Eighth Doctor, it's one of the greatest final lines by a Doctor. I didn't appreciate this at the time, but now looking back, all these years later after the Night of the Doctor came out, it's such a great final line to end the Eighth Doctor with. As far as we know, this is the last time when the Doctor regenerates when he's not stood up and all the regeneration energy bursts out. It's quite unique. We don't see the morphing effect, which I suppose you could take points off it for. It stops it from potentially being in S tier. I was debating whether to put it in A or B, but I thought no, because I prefer this regeneration to a lot of the others that I've talked about. And I do like the payoff that we get in the end, though. We have the mirror image of a young John Hurt, which was taken from archival material of some of John Hurt's earlier work. So yeah, for me, as a standalone regeneration scene, it works very nicely. It's a great way for the Eighth Doctor to end and for the War Doctor to begin. War Doctor's regeneration into the Ninth Doctor's, it's quite simple really. The War Doctor changes into the Ninth due to old age in a similar vein to the First Doctor. And I think that the regeneration effect used in the TARDIS is quite nice, but it's the same old effect that's been used in the majority of new series regenerations. I'm going to put this in B tier because I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with this regeneration as such, but it just feels samey, but it does the job. It's fine. And I like the last lines of the War Doctor. And yeah, I know Eccleston did not actually take part in this regeneration, but we get a little tiny glimpse that the face of the War Doctor is changing into the face of the Ninth Doctor. So I'm fine with that. The Ninth Doctor's regeneration, oh, you know what? I'm going to put this in S tier. Holds a special place in my heart, this, because it's the first time I ever saw a regeneration, because I grew up with the Ninth Doctor and the 10th Doctor. This was before I went back and watched the classic series. It's a really great regeneration. It's the first time we had the whole explosion effect with the head and the arms and stuff like that. The whole golden energy coming out of the Doctor's body as he transforms. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful regeneration. It's a nice way to bring the whole idea of regeneration into the 21st century, because obviously it's the first time we see a regeneration take place since the show comes back in 2005. And I think the speech by the Ninth Doctor, it goes without saying, everyone knows, it's just fantastic, isn't it? You see what I did there? That definitely was not planned. Or was it? I'm not including the 10th Doctor into the 10th Doctor. As great as a cliffhanger as it was, I just want to include when the actors change. So we're going to just talk about the 10th Doctor into the 11th, as seen at the end of time. Again, really good regeneration. Some people have criticised this, the whole I don't want to go thing. I mean, I've never really had any problems with it. I don't know if that's perhaps a bias or it's nostalgia getting in the way because, as I said earlier, I grew up with this Doctor and I grew up with the Ninth Doctor. So I was very sad, as were many people when this happened, when Tennant left. You can imagine how happy I was when Tennant came back to the role all those years later in The Power of the Doctor. So this one, though, like I have to be honest though, I do prefer the regeneration at the end of the parting of the ways. What let this down? I will say this: the whole longevity of the whole thing. What caused the regeneration was again radiation. It's always radiation, isn't it? And then we have the whole farewell tour, and it just lasts for so long, so long. I get it's like a whole tribute to the 10th Doctor's era, and I criticise the Fourth Doctor one for this, but there's a certain balance. There's over egging it, and then there's under egging it. I feel that in Logopolis it was under egged, and in the end of time it was over egged. We never really got that. So I'm going to put this in A because I still like the regeneration. I think the scene is very nice. I think the whole idea of the TARDIS exploding, you know, it's effective. And the morph from Tennant into Smith is very nice as well. And I don't mind the last line. What I think lets this down is just the whole thing that precedes it, really. And I suppose the end of time isn't the greatest story in the world. It's good, but I prefer the parting of the ways. Moving on to the 11th Doctor's regeneration now, into the 12th. Good. I like this regeneration. It's the end of the first cycle of regenerations, as far as we know, for the Doctor. He dies of old age, much like the first Doctor. Well, it's up for debate, the first Doctor, but it's definitely much like the War Doctor as well. And then we get the nice final scene with Matt Smith. It's played beautifully. It's a great final speech for this incarnation. You really do feel like Matt Smith is talking as himself here rather than as the 11th Doctor. Really touching, really great writing by Stephen Moffat, and very touching. Some people criticised this at the time, that the Doctor just changes just like that. There's no explosion effect. He just, in the click of a finger, changes, and then he's Peter Capaldi, just like that. And there's no morph effect or anything like that. It's different. I'll give it that. It's different. And I can see where people are coming from, saying, like, why didn't they do that? Because the morphing effect is really nice. I'm not going to lie. I do love the morph effect. But to be honest, we did kind of get the full regeneration at the top of the clock tower. I'd like to think that, because that's where you see all of the energy. This is the reset. This is the start of the second cycle. The Doctor's gone young again. He's become how he wants to be. He gets his last hurrahs before he changes properly into the next incarnation. So I think in context of the story, it makes sense. I'm going to put this in A tier. It's difficult. I was tempted to put it in S. That might be a bit crazy. People are saying, S tier, are you mad? I put it in A because I think it would have been more shocking if Clara walked into the TARDIS and then Peter Capaldi was just stood there, and then, oh shit, he's regenerated. That's it, done. Bit controversial, but hey-ho. But having said that, that last scene with Smith, I'm not going to deny it, it's really good. Some people might think it goes on for too long, but I like it for what it is. And I think it's a great summary of what regeneration is all about, as well as what real life can be all about, because people can change in real life, and it's a really great reflection on that with this speech. So I think because of this speech, actually, it's a big reason as to why I'm putting this in A tier. Moving on to the 12th Doctor's regeneration now. Oh, God. Right. I absolutely adore the 12th Doctor. I love Peter Capaldi. The regeneration into the 13th, yeah, it does the job, but it uses the same old regeneration effect. You see, some people criticise the whole idea of 11th just changing into 12th just like that, click of a finger. And then we're back to the same old effect that's been used since the parting of the ways at the end of Twice Upon a Time. What I think lets this down is I don't think that the special effects that we used for this particular regeneration were as good as the effects that were used in the parting of the ways. Bearing in mind that there's 12 years between the airing of these stories. Parting of the Ways was 2005, Twice Upon a Time, 2017. You would think that there'd be something better about it, but I just felt like the whole effect, it wasn't as good. And I feel like what preceded the regeneration was not good either. It wasn't a great final story for the 12th Doctor. It was overshadowed by the inclusion of the first Doctor, who had all sorts of characterization problems. Not the fault of David Bradley at all, more the fault of the writing. I don't know what Stephen Moffat was doing. But the whole cause of the regeneration actually took place in the previous episode. The Doctor falls, a Cyberman electrocutes him, and then he gets caught in an explosion later on. That's a really, really devastating way for the 12th Doctor to regenerate. He stops himself from regenerating, and then later on we find out that it is the events that are taking place in Twice Upon a Time which are averting the 12th Doctor's regeneration into the 13th, as well as the first into the second. Also, on a side note, I don't like how little bits were retconned for the first Doctor in Twice Upon a Time. Some people probably love it, which is fine, but me, I just like to think that how he regenerated in the 10th planet is how he regenerated, and then that's it. What we saw then was what we saw. We didn't need anything additional here. As nice as it is with callbacks with the first Doctor saying the long way round and all that, it's just, yeah, it doesn't really work for me. I suppose the most profound thing about the 12th Doctor's regeneration into the 13th is the fact that this is the first time that the gender of the Doctor changes. The morphing effect comes back in this one, and that does work very well. I like how the first glimpses of the 13th Doctor are more like mirror images until we properly see her. The whole mirror thing, I like to say, is a nice callback to the power of the Daleks. When the second Doctor looks in the mirror, at first he sees an image of the first Doctor before it reverts back to the new face of the second Doctor. So yeah, as grand as that is, the first female Doctor, that's if you discount all the stupid timeless children nonsense. Yeah, because of the fact that the regeneration feels samey, the story that preceded it, I'm putting it in C, because I was a bit disappointed when it came out, and nothing has really changed since. Yeah, it's in C. Controversial, probably, but that's my opinion. As much as I really adore the 12th Doctor, I think he deserves a better ending, if I'm honest with you. Right, 13th Doctor now into the 14th. Love it. Adore this. This is how you evolve the regeneration effect that was first used in 2005. I criticised it before for Twice Upon a Time. It felt samey and yet it felt lazy as well, with the whole TARDIS exploding as well. Like, we've seen it all before. Do we really need to see it again? The special effects weren't as good. But here, at the end of The Power of the Doctor, the special effects team really went all out here. It looks absolutely spectacular. The fact that it takes place on top of a cliff, and it wasn't actually at the top of a cliff, it was all part of green screen. Really remarkable effects here achieved by the team. I think that the 13th Doctor, the cause of her regeneration, the cause of her regeneration is a little bit, but the scene itself is lovely, and I like her last scenes with Yaz. I like how the companions turn up to reminisce about their adventures with the Doctor. It's nice to see companions coming together, talking about this like a little seminar group. And then that last scene with the 13th Doctor, it just feels so peaceful. It's really nice. It's a nice change compared to what we've seen prior to this with previous incarnations. And the effects, the way that she changes into the 14th Doctor, it's commendable. It's really good. I was going to put this in S tier, actually. I was going to put it in S tier until I thought about the cause of the regeneration, because the 13th Doctor just gets zapped by something that hardly anyone talked about for the whole story. And in a way, it kind of makes the regeneration feel a little tacked on to the end of this story. But I still really like the regeneration scene itself. So for that, I'm putting this in A tier. I'm glad that this changed my mind about the glowy effect, because, as I said, I was getting a little bit tired and I was waiting to see something a little bit different. But hey ho, what we got here, I think, is an improvement vastly on the previous two regenerations at least. And I like the fact that it's outside as well, so we don't have to see the TARDIS get blown up yet again. And there we have it. That is my tier list for the Doctor's regenerations. Do you agree with this tier list? If you do, sound off in the comments. Make sure you leave a like, and if you're new, then please subscribe. You're very welcome to. And all I can say for now is thank you very much for watching this tier list video, guys. Stay tuned for many more Doctor Who tier lists. Take care, and I'll see you next time.